Hello, this is Freethought Forum, a program of the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. I'm Joe Barnhart.
And I'm Larry Rhodes. Welcome to another episode of Freethought Forum. This is May 10th, 2011. And we want you to know that if you don't believe in God, you're not alone. Even here in East Tennessee, you can find free-thinking atheists and agnostics. This is a show for them and people curious about living a life free of supernatural beliefs.
Today we're going to discuss a topic that's very much of concern to many of us, and to you and to me, to Larry, the question of moral relativism. And we should be concerned about this. And we're going to talk about hedonism, relativism, and the element of emotion and ethics. So stay with us.
This is a call-in show. While we go over a few announcements, we invite you to start calling in now at the number on your screen, 215-2288. Get a pen and paper and we'll give you our email address later on in the show. Happy Hour with the Atheist Society of Knoxville will be meeting up at Barley's tonight after the show for food, drink, and conversation. Look for the silver-jacketed copy of The God Delusion standing upright on the table. Be over there.
Okay, the Rationalists of East Tennessee have discussions, this time coming up on May the 22nd. We're going to have a discussion on the meaning of some key words, some definitions that have been used and have a lot of emotion packed in them. Free will, for example. What does that mean? What's free market? Freedom of choice, born free. What do these words mean? And using ordinary language, what do they mean? And they're going to discuss how free are we? And what's the difference between freedom and, say, independence?
Mm-hmm. I heard an interesting concept this week. One philosopher said it's not really a question of free will, it's more of a question of free won't.
There's a good
because
point.
Our instincts tell us what to do, and that's what our will is. But then we have the intelligence to override them where we need to. The annual public lecture for the RET is on May 15th at 2 o'clock. Rob Boston, senior policy analyst for the Americans United for the Separation of Church and State, will speak on church-state separation, the challenges and opportunities ahead. I'm not sure if that's at RET. Do you know for sure?
But I don't.
Okay.
Sorry.
Visit our websites for additional details, including times and locations.
Okay. And we don't want to forget, this is the month of the birth of the noted freethinker, Bertrand Russell. I remember I wrote a review of his book once, Why I Am Not a Christian. And the president called me in and thought I had written it.
He didn't like that, huh?
Well, I wanted to try to analyze what he was trying to say, both pro and con, and I thought that's what a college campus should do, try to see the various arguments. And he raises the question, what's an agnostic, and what's the difference between an agnostic and an atheist, and a theist, and a polytheist, and Trinitarians. He deals with these, and then also raises the question, is there a foundation of ethics? And we're going to get into this.
I'm going to try to touch on that. Mm-hmm. You never know whether you should say agnostic or whether I should say atheist. He said, I assume this is a quote from the book, "It is a very difficult question, and I dare say that some of you have been troubled by it. As a philosopher, if I were to speaking to a purely philosophic audience, I would say that I ought to describe myself as an agnostic, but I do not think that there is a conclusive argument which one can prove that there is or is not a God." Well, that speaks to knowledge, whether he knows there's a God or not. It doesn't really speak to whether he believes in a God, which would be the theist-atheist question.
Yeah, one way to approach this is say, let's set up the various theories and hypotheses and say, well, of those, which one seems to make more sense? And that doesn't mean that you're a know-it-all.
Right.
I mean,
or that you have knowledge of it.
We're all agnostics on that because we are terribly finite mortals. But we can say, well, this view, and theologians have done this among themselves, this view of God makes less sense than this other view of God, and on and on. And among atheists, you have various views.
Well,
and
yeah, you have people who disagree on whether the concept is true or not, whether or not a particular description is good.
Good.
He said, on the other hand, if I am to convey the right impression for the ordinary man on the street, I think I ought to say that I am an atheist. Because when I say that I cannot prove that there is not a God, I ought to add equally that I cannot prove that there are not the Homeric gods, or Jupiter, or any of the ancient Egyptian gods.
Yeah, I think you could say that you could take the various versions of God and do what's called internal criticism. You do this in science, and you do it in ordinary thinking. You take a view, and then you analyze it to see how far it goes, to see if it holds up consistently, and if it doesn't, you revise it, trying to make it to become consistent if you can. If you can't, well, then you take another view.
And the problem comes with your presuppositions, though. If you presuppose that there is a God and that he has the power to create universes and planets and stuff, and then you ask yourself the question, did God create the world? Well, yeah, because I already presuppose that there's an entity like that and that he has that power. Well, it's a circular logic, of course.
Would you agree that a presupposition is still a theory or a hypothesis?
Sure.
Yeah, so they still can be analyzed
Yep.
and examined to see if they're consistent, or at least parts of it consistent or inconsistent.
For sure.
Well, let's plunge into our issue.
A still living freethinker is an actor, George Clooney. George Clooney was profiled in the Washington Post on September 28th, 1997, and in that interview he told writer Sharon Waxman that, I don't believe in heaven and hell. I don't know if I believe in God. All I know that as an individual, I won't allow this life, the only life I know to exist, to be wasted, which is, I would think, good advice. I mean, we have proof of this life, we don't have proof of the next.
Bird in the hand. Okay, let me refer in this issue, unless you have something else.
No, go ahead.
This issue of moral relativism, let me explain why it is a problem. If you have each society determining what's moral or immoral, then by definition that's
relativism.
And if you happen to be doing business from one society to another, that becomes
a problem.
You have to learn. And then, of course, you ask, well, which one makes more sense? For example, in one culture, when the husband died, then the widow could be sacrificed on an altar or consumed in flames. Well, that seems to me immoral. But I'm not appealing.
And to the woman.
And certainly from the woman.
Probably.
So you get, not only do you have cultural relativism, you have subcultures.
And personal.
And then you have personal relativism. So now, how do you have ethics if you have that? Well, you obviously can't. Because people do cross over boundaries and have to communicate with each other.
And trade. They have to have commerce between the different cultures.
So how does ethics begin? You might.
Well, I think with a mutual agreement not to harm each other would be a good start during these trades, and not to cheat each other is a good start as well.
Yeah. In fact, you could, when the word relativism comes up with regard to ethics, often the question is, well, you have to have an objective aspect of ethics in order for it to be ethics, and that seems to make sense to me. So let's talk about what is objective about ethics. And let's start this way. We live in a world of nature that is not our whims and desires. It is if the word objective means anything, gravity is objective.
Well, it means it has a common objective entity, or something that we can all agree on. It actually exists.
It's universal.
It's universal and verifiable, I guess we could say, too.
Also, what's universal is the fact that all human beings have desires and wants. If we did not have wants and desires, the question of ethics would not come into play.
Right.
It would be unnecessary.
Well, you could say that ethics are outside of the mind, where wants and desires are inside the mind.
Yeah, and that's the subjective aspect.
Subjective and objective.
But your wants are objective to me. They're not mine. I'm the subject. And whereas if you have desires, you're the subject and I'm the object. So ethics has to be, in order for it to be ethics, it has to be both subjective and objective. Otherwise, it's like it'd be like one wing of a bird. It won't fly.
Right.
Now, in this objective world of other people's desires and wants, and our own wants, and in the natural world that we have to live in, how do we develop ethics? And I suggest as we start with the fact that we have wants, and we discover the hard way that we cannot satisfy all our wants, and for two reasons. One of our wants might interfere with another.
Right, well, they could be conflicting wants with someone else.
And we often teach our children, we're not trying to deprive you of freedom, we're trying to say control some of your present freedoms for the sake of future freedoms.
Right.
Because you have to live in a factual, objective world. And part of the objective world is the society we live in. I mean, if there were no other people, then lying would not be so big a problem.
True.
So it's out of those objective facts combined with our subjective desires and wants that ethics develops and grows. And I think we can show how this goes. You had something you wanted to...
Well, the only thing I really wanted to say was that a lot of times I'm going to be talking to a believer or a theist, and they'll say, there are objective ethics, objective morals, and of course he points to the Bible. I said, well, yes, an atheist or a freethinker would also have objective morals, something that we can agree on and feel strongly about, and even come together and give them the force of law. They're called laws. We agree as a city, as a state, as a nation, that we're going to live under certain rules, and that these rules are important to keep the harm to each other to a minimum. So we write them down and we give them the power of law.
In fact, there is an interesting passage in the Bible in which Abraham presumably is arguing with God in this, and he says, in effect, will not God be just? In other words, he's appealing to an objective standard that presumably God's got to live up to.
Right.
Now, I have a Calvinist here who's arguing that ethics is simply whatever God wills.
Right.
And he says anything God wills is right. But I'm arguing, no, Plato is right, that even God has to have standards or he's not God.
Right.
If you're going to have it. Now, if we've got a call coming
Looks
in
like
already.
we have a call coming in.
Let's go ahead.
Welcome to Freethought Forum. May we have a name or nickname?
Hello, this is Faithless Forrest, and sorry I can't be there with you guys in the studio today.
Okay. Hey, Faithless.
I wanted to call in and talk to you about, the issue of, how do we establish morals? And I want to quote a man I greatly admire, which is Dan Barker. Dan Barker talks about, as a moral code. He uses a very simple one. It's simple to state, challenging to execute, and that is that we should strive to go through life to minimize the harm that we cause. And he gave a nice example about the issue of, is it always immoral to lie? And he said, well, no, there are times, and the example he used was if a woman is fleeing an abusive husband and knocks on the door and says, let me in, my husband's trying to kill me. You let her in, and when he knocks on the door and asks for her, you say, we haven't seen her. So, his example is one of you have to evaluate the consequences of all the things you do and try to minimize harm.
I certainly agree.
So what he's saying is that sometimes the moral thing to do under certain conditions is to lie. Now, unfortunately, most of us, if we lie, do it mostly for convenience rather than from a moral background.
In other words,
I think that's what his argument is. You have in that sense, you have another higher moral principle is try to save human life.
But if you have a biblical hardliner on your hand and they come and say, well, where is she? And he says, well, she's in the bedroom. that's going to compromise her health and maybe even her life. So you've got to say, is that an ethical thing to do? And I would say it's not.
Well, for most Christians I know
wouldn't take that line.
And the ones I know would not try to take the gun away from them. They'd have enough sense not to.
Well,
do
I'm
that.
not even assuming he has a gun.
but anyhow, they would see that there are cases in which another moral principle takes precedence over telling the truth, which is not to say that all ethics is relative.
No. But in that particular case, your friends, you're talking about the Christians that you know, or the religious people, not necessarily Christian, who would take that line, are being morally relevant at that time.
Yeah. In fact, let me read a passage.
Isn't it possible to say that what they're doing is they're evaluating morals?
They're evaluating it in real time, which is what we need to do.
That's what thinking is, And here's a passage from Gordon Clark, who is an arch Calvinist, taught Billy Graham and Gordon and Edward John Carnell and others. And he says, "It may seem strange at first that God would decree an immoral act, but the Bible shows that he did." Now, he says, however, that God does not himself do what's immoral, but that seems to me be like having a
simple contradiction to
the
me.
Godfather saying, "I've got a trigger man, I let him do the dirty work." I mean, that won't wash.
Yeah.
Okay, I was going to talk about or remark on how, the Ten Commandments, which they keep pushing in our face and wanting to post in every courthouse, says, "Thou shalt not lie." But the Bible itself says in Thessalonians 2, God shall send them strong delusions.
As a matter of fact,
they shall believe a lie, that they may all be damned. So I'm amazed at that statement, because it undermines several kinds of claims or sort of assumptions about what Jehovah, Yahweh would be all about, which is, does he want everyone to be saved? Yet he sends lies so that some would be damned.
Well, there's a passage in the Bible that said that...
Why bother to do that? If he's going to make judgment on them anyway, why bother to fool them with a lie?
There's a passage in the Bible that says that God put a lying spirit in the mouth
of the serpent.
Prophets.
Oh.
Yeah, so that raises the question for these Calvinists and others, is how they can escape this moral relativism that they are constantly denouncing, when the Bible, it seems to me, has both good moral standards and lots of hara and moral relativism. The Bible is not one book.
No.
So if you're going to quote the Bible, you still have to have moral standards to pick and choose.
By which you would judge the things that you see in the book.
Yeah. And all people who read the Bible do that. Even if you say you take the whole Bible, you take the whole, but you shift it according to some higher principle, presumably.
Right. It's true.
Sure. Well, and I guess I wanted to kind of, inject one last thing, and that is to say that, of course, the people who read the Bible and say that it's morally unassailable, well, they're choosing to interpret it and redefine what some of the words obviously mean. Well, I'm going to get off now and clear the line. I would encourage anyone else to call in and speak to us on today's subject. Remind us again, Larry, Joe, what's today's subject?
Thank you, Forrest. Appreciate it. Today's topic is emotion, hedonism, pleasure, and moral relativism. We're taking calls now at the number on the screen. There's about a 7-second delay in the broadcast, so once you call, please mute your television and listen to us over the phone, or we will all be confused.
Yeah, be patient with us. We'll try to be patient.
We also have today some of the musings of several of ASK and RET members about today's subject. We asked them for their thoughts, and they sent them in by email. We'd like to discuss some of them. From D, he says, I often explore the idea of moral relativism by reading and looking at the Bible with respect to the Bible. For example, ask a believer, a theist, if slavery is an absolutely immoral act. Is it ever morally okay to own another human being like you own livestock or cars? If they say it is never okay, then their belief is counter to that of the Bible, which is okay with slavery within certain guidelines. Not even Jesus said anything against slavery.
Well, as a matter of fact, Paul sent a slave back to its owner. Now, you could argue that there are some principles in the Bible that would oppose slavery, but that
like Jesus is do unto others.
Well, yeah, the golden rule is obvious. So what I'm saying is, and I think you would agree, that this book is not a consistent book. It should, and you can learn from the Bible if you see it as a human book of people trying to struggle with their perceptions of their time, trying to come to terms with their lives.
Yeah, I can understand the Bible in that light. I really can.
And a lot of it makes good sense.
And it's trying.
But like a lot of things in the past, as well as the present, just because they're put together in words doesn't mean they always make sense.
No.
Some of them are pretty.
The New Testament was a very progressive book for his time, and Jesus was a progressive person for his time. And you could say that may very well be why he was killed.
Yeah, I think Socrates and Jesus both. For that very reason. And Paul wrote a lot about the notion of Jesus. Now that's a big debate about the historical Jesus, and we're going to deal with that in August.
Okay.
What the historical Jesus was and was not alive.
Well, you studied the Bible. You're a professor of religion. Let me ask you a question I've been thinking about myself. When Jesus was on the mountain, he was talking about do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Was he talking about his own race, his own clan, Jewish people, and excluding outsiders of that, or was he including all people on the earth?
I think that's a very useful question.
Because I've heard it both ways.
There's a passage in which Jesus is doing some good to a Gentile woman, and some are complaining. And so the comment was, well, even the dogs get the crumbs, which I take to be a sense of humor, you see. In other words, you'd give it even a dog crumbs.
So he was speaking of her as metaphorically as the dog.
Yeah, and some in those days referred to Gentiles as dogs. Now, to be fair to the Jews, not all Jews did that, you see.
So we still don't have an answer to the question.
So the question is, did Jesus have a universal ethic?
For all humans, just those in his clan and
I think
race?
From his point of view, I thought I answered the question. Right there, he was criticizing those.
So the answer is the message was for his...
It's for the Gentiles and the...
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, when you referred to her as a dog and giving her crumbs, it might have been a much lower caste of...
That was his sarcasm.
Okay.
Yeah, he was trying to say, you treat these people like that, and you give even the dogs crumbs. Surely you'd
allow me to do this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sometimes I remember my brother once said, "Did Jesus have a sense of humor?" And I think it's a good question.
Right there was.
I think that's a good example.
From P, she said that, or he said, I don't know. I think it is very difficult to state with any certainty that there is an absolutely right or an absolute wrong at any time in history. If that is where we find ourselves as secular humanists, then so be it. In other words, that's a vote for moral relativism.
Would you say that it is absolutely true there are no absolutes?
Yeah.
That's Garfield.
Yeah.
So, and I'll give you an example of practical ethics. I made a statement on this program once that I thought that Calvin, as I perceive him, was a sociopath. An atheist friend of mine said, "Joe, I think you're mistaken." And she gave her view of Calvin. Now, the reason I like this approach of hers, even if I differ with her on this, is here is a woman who was, an atheist. She's concerned with the truth regarding a person like Calvin, whose view she thinks is pretty obnoxious, just immorally.
Yeah.
But she thought you owe it to Calvin, like anyone else, to try to see him accurately.
I thought I would say it was true that you were seeing him accurate when you thought he was a jerk.
Well, I was using the word sociopath.
Sociopath. I was being kind.
Yeah, and she's being very precise. But my point is that you cannot have intelligent discussion without the goal of truth-telling. And this is how...
If your mind is biased.
Yeah, and so I'm saying that Moses didn't give us a rule against lying. The language itself is a rule against lying. You can't communicate. If I use the word in a certain way that is not standard, then I'm misleading you.
Yeah, and if you're doing it on purpose, then the language is being corrupted, and I'm not getting the meaning that is true. Did you want to, I mean, maybe our listeners don't know much about Calvin. Would you like to give us just a reason or two why Calvin was such a sociopath?
Well, in my opinion, his view is one of the most vicious ever concocted by a human mortal.
Can you give us some particulars?
Yeah. He believed that the creator of the universe, from his viewpoint, decided before he had ever created some that he would choose some to be elected for bliss and some to be rejected. Now, there are a lot of little
Some people go to heaven, some people go to hell.
Yeah,
it's already predetermined before they were born.
And they got into a dispute among themselves on the supra and the lapsarians, all that. But when they boil it down, is that the deity knew this, what he was doing on this theory, and he saw all of it ahead of time, and still said, I've got plans to damn these. And
so he went ahead with it.
Yeah, and furthermore, even if you had free will on this view, I'll give free will to all these, but I'll give grace just to this. And that made, I think this is kind of a clannishness that Calvin pumped into a theology, and he should have been morally condemned. Now, some of the Christians, the Arminians, thought, John Milton, for example, just thought he was perverse.
Okay, we got an email from T saying that I would suggest that all individuals have an absolute right to their own minds and bodies. If this is not the case, then all degrades from there based on, everything degrades from there based on the biggest thug or even benign governments. He thinks that most of the people who say they're moral relativists are merely giving in to the majority. For a moral relativist, I don't believe that. For a moral relativist, might makes right. That's exactly the opposite of what I would think. And
well, a problem with moral, with might makes right, that is a kind of an absolutist position. In fact, you could argue that Calvinism is supreme might makes right.
Right.
And that's the worst kind of ethics.
Right. Here we have another call coming in. Welcome to Freethought Forum. We have a name or nickname?
David.
David, welcome. Do you have a comment or suggestion?
I have a question for you guys. I watch y'all pretty regular, and I've been on the internet and looking up. For 35 years, I was a Christian and was brainwashed, or I felt like I was. I just couldn't fit in. It just seemed impossible, the things they were talking about, and I just, they wanted my money, they wanted this, they wanted that. I could never do enough. And could you guys answer a question for me? What makes people so easily brainwashed, and they put their confidence in a man just like themselves and give them their money and their children and everything else and join this and do that? And I don't understand. So if you could try to answer that for me, I'll hang up and listen.
Okay. Thank you very much for your question. From my viewpoint, it all comes from being raised in the religion. You grow up as a young child very dependent on your parents for good information. They tell you, even in the earliest societies, if you're standing near the river and they say, move from the river, you can't question them. You've got to move because there may be danger in the river, a crocodile, whatever. Your life depends on what they tell you. They're the most trusted and honored persons in your life. They tell you that there's a God. They reinforce it every day, over every meal, and at bedtime. And then when you're old enough to go to school, your teachers, back in the 50s when I grew up, we said the teachers led us in prayer every day. And in government, same thing, prayer. God did this, Jesus does that. Even the biggest authorities in your world reinforce this earliest conception of God that you were given by your parents. And that's just not Christianity. That's every country that has a pervasive religion. Think of Islam, think of Hinduism, think of Catholicism, any of those. And once you get to the point where you just stop questioning, a young child will question, but his parents before long will stop that. In no uncertain terms, you can't question this. Don't ask the preacher questions. And once you stop questioning and start accepting, the road is pretty much
but part of it is
paved.
If part of it is plugged into getting jobs and keeping your job. Now, let's be fair on both sides of this. In fact, there are more than one side. But let's say you're in communist Russia for a while. The chances of getting a job, and you were an atheist, and the communist was much higher. And this is state.
It does work both
atheism.
ways. That's why it's important for a person to question.
So good. That's why we have church-state separation.
It does.
So
it works both ways.
Question.
Right. But don't turn off your mind. Keep questioning and use your mind.
But you can see it even among teenagers. I remember talking to some teenagers and they're saying independence, and they're all dressed alike.
Yeah, like.
And I said, "Where's your independence?"
Yeah, they're basically wearing the teen uniform. Okay, from K. Christians often use the word moral relativism pejoratively, and I'm not sure if this is based on Scripture. I covet many things. In other words, even though the Ten Commandments tell them not to covet, American society would come to a grinding halt if everybody stopped coveting their neighbor's new car, their whatever possession they have, because that's what they work for in many cases. That's the thing that drives them so much, to have a better life, have one that equals the ones that Joneses have down the street. And it sells products. It's part of our American, well, most countries' society. So
let me defend a rule.
How do you do that?
Let me defend, if I can, a rule that says coveting is a bad thing. And I think this is why that culture developed this. It meant, in that context, envy. And envy, in that sense of the word, means you not only want what another person has, you want that person not to have it. And that's why, that is very destructive to a community. In fact, it's bad.
You want to be in his position, in other words.
In other words, it's bad for the economy, for one thing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because you don't produce, you start trying to rob somebody.
Steal.
And in other words, coveting, a rule against coveting is trying to nip stealing in the bud. Now, that's different from what you're talking about, a desire to improve yourself. And like people say, I covet your prayers.
Well, every advertisement is aimed to get you to covet what they're selling.
Now, I would agree on this point. A lot of that hustling job is immoral, especially doing it to young people and children.
Doing it dishonestly, which so much advertising is dishonest these days.
We have a consumerism society that both, whether you're a theist or an agnostic, a Christian or a Jew or what, we have been brainwashed more on that than a lot of religions, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So that we have learned not to be satisfied with some of our joys.
Yeah.
By the way, let's talk about hedonism,
okay,
which we promised to do.
Sure.
By the way, that's a moral commitment we have.
It is.
The word hedonism, just a Greek word, means pleasure. And I used to hear a lot of preachers denounce hedonism. And they got a lot of pleasure in doing that. Now, to be fair to them, there are different kinds of pleasure. Some pleasures can rob you of your life and your happiness, your mind, and your other pleasures.
Heroin, say.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. But I think you could say this. Suppose you could be married and have everything you want except pleasure and enjoyment. Would you be married? Would you want to be married?
I take the fifth on that. I'm not sure I understand the question, too.
Well, let me try this. I asked a minister friend of mine who had a good sense of humor. I said, suppose you could go to heaven and get everything you want except pleasure. And he said, thanks for nothing.
Yeah.
Now, what he was saying...
You wouldn't get any pleasure out of the things that you did acquire or
in other
experience.
Words, pleasure, in other words, is an ingredient and a source of ethics.
Mm-hmm. Well, the Constitution guarantees, or maybe it's a preamble, I forget, Declaration of Independence, says that we already have the right to freedom and pursuit of happiness. Yeah. What is happiness without pleasure? I mean, some people, pleasure is all of happiness, and other people it's a good part of it, but you certainly can't have happiness without some degree of pleasure.
Yeah, when you listen to great music, if you don't get pleasure out of it, I mean, you've missed
Or reading a good book, or gazing upon a beautiful scene. I mean, pleasure comes in all veins. And to me, the best part of pleasure per se is most of it doesn't harm anybody.
Yeah, that's why I enjoy being married to my wife. She watches a butterfly and a hummingbird and gets pleasure, and I get pleasure watching her get pleasure.
Yeah,
and this enriches the life.
But there's so many people that would deny people pleasure because they don't agree with the types of activities that give those people pleasure, even though no harm was given to anybody in the meantime.
Yeah, if there's no harm, then that's none of their business.
Right, exactly. That's what the Constitution means when it's guaranteed right. No harm, it's none of your business. Matter of fact, I think it was Benjamin Franklin wanted the national motto to be "Mind your business."
That's a good motto.
That's a good motto.
In fact, if you take care of your own business, you're less likely to be interrupting other people's.
Speaking of the national motto, just as a reminder that "In God We Trust" has not always been the national motto. It was only introduced during the McCarthy era, on paper money. During the godless communist scare in the United States, where McCarthy was such a big figure, he and some other politicians got the law passed to put the new motto on our money, adopt it as a motto, and put it on the money. By the way, E pluribus unum is still the motto, one of our mottos. We have two. And E pluribus unum goes back 100 years earlier than that, or 150 years earlier than that, which is, in my mind, a much better...
in English meaning?
It's out of many one, because we are a nation of many peoples from many lands, but we are one strong nation because of that diversity. And I think it sums up our national pride better than anything else. And when you start putting God into the mix, you have just started dividing people.
Well, that's a good example of how ethics develops. If you're going to do commerce and trade together, create a school together, then you have to have respect for each other. That's a moral principle developing. Now notice, it's because you want something. You want certain joys and happiness and pleasure.
You want the best life you can have.
So you develop certain rules and guidelines and rigorously adhere to them. Same as in a baseball game. You can't have baseball
without rules.
Otherwise it's mayhem.
Yeah.
And that's not much pleasure.
Nope. Mark I. Vulatek talked about moral foundations of atheism and Christianity. He says anybody who has debated the existence of God with a Christian or other theist is sure to have been presented with some variant of the following exposition. If God does not exist, there's no reason to do blank. Where blank is any kind of behavior that does not, is any kind of behavior that most of us think morality requires. For instance, if a missionary is intercepted en route to the bookstore last month, informed me that God does not exist, there would be no reason for someone to remain faithful to his spouse. Well, to me, God does not exist, but I have every reason to remain faithful to my wife. One, I love her. Two, I don't want to mess with anybody else since she's my wife. I love her. And I certainly don't want to worry about STDs and all this other things. And infidelity can ruin the marriage. And nowhere did I mention God.
I heard an evangelical say once that atheists are moral, but they have no reason for it.
Yeah.
I thought, now, why would he say this? Does he mean there's no basis for ethics or no motive? And I never could understand what he was talking about because I'm not sure he was clear in his own mind. I think he meant you have no motive. Well,
Well, have lots of motives for being good, because you generally reap good rewards for being good.
Well, first of all,
but even if the rewards weren't in the mixture, it makes you feel better to know that you're benefiting yourself and your fellow humans.
You get the joy of watching some.
Right.
Well, we still
Talk
have
about
a phrase
altruism.
like, whenever you, let's suppose you did something for me, and I say thank you. You might say, "My pleasure."
Right, because it gave you pleasure.
Yeah.
It gave me pleasure. But this opposite view, where this particular missionary, if he were convinced that God didn't exist, let's say that he fell from grace and lost his faith, does that mean that he would go out and start doing terrible things? I think not. But that's the reasoning that he was putting forward. So I mean, you just have to take the other hand of it.
He seems to be saying, if there's no God, then why should I tell the truth?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you tell the truth because you get all kinds of rewards.
It's positively reinforced.
And if you don't have truth-telling, you cannot have a community.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot have a marriage. You can't have a school system.
Commerce.
You cannot have trade, commerce. Lying is so disruptive to all relationships.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I once asked my class, do you think professional thieves would want to have a law making thievery legal? And
Professional thieves?
Yeah, and they said, no, a professional thief would want everybody to be as honest as possible. Otherwise, they would not have anything to steal.
Right, because everybody would be stealing everything else.
Yeah, and you wouldn't produce anything.
And
honesty is a basis for just having ordinary communication in order to make an economy just begin to operate.
We kind of went by our mid-program break. Do you have that handy?
No, but you do.
I'm sure I do somewhere.
Well, while you're...
Here it is.
Go.
Sponsor identification. Joe, if you want to read the first part.
Point.
In case you're just tuning in, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. You can see our website addresses at the top of the screen. Freethought Forum is funded jointly by the ASK and the RET and individual contributions.
And we want to thank anonymous contributors for their support.
Right, and in particular BM this time. You can send us feedback at the email address on your screen.
Yeah.
It's freethoughtforum@yahoo.com right here. There you go. But don't wait. This is a live call-in show. Call in now. 215-2288. It's on the screen. The Atheist Society of Knoxville meets several times during the week, and we have an evening meetup for food and drink. We will be going down to Barley's Tap Room after the show tonight, so we'll be there probably till 7:30 or 8. You're welcome to come down. Just don't come down if you're going to preach, proselytize, or provoke, or punch. Thank you, Atheist Experience.
If you want to come to debate, that's
If you want to come down and have a friendly discussion, please do.
That's okay. The Rationalists of East Tennessee has Sunday activities involving lively presentations and discussion of interesting topics. Almost always, I've been there. I want to get up and say, let's have more of this.
Yeah. Like these upcoming, what every atheist should know about the Bible. What is art? The evolutionary history of flowers. They do have several presentations based on evolution down there. It's a good place to come to.
And climate change. What about it? What's the rational basis?
Notice that we've had some record flooding, record tornadoes, just all kinds of bad weather coming up.
So pros and cons on this.
Yeah, there's a lot of pros and cons, but I don't think that anybody can say that we're not having some really weird weather lately. It's been lasting a couple of years now.
Well, let's have a discussion about that sometime.
Yeah, that would be cool.
I remember my Uncle Charlie in the 40s was predicting the end of the world. He thought Mussolini was going to be the Antichrist. And we have other versions now.
Even the President of the United States, some people think is the Antichrist.
FDR, I remember, was one of the candidates. But anyhow, in East Tennessee it was FDR. Other parts of the country was some other president later.
Yeah.
But anyhow, he was saying, look at the changes in the climate. This is in the 40s. And look at this and look at that. And we, of course, we were in the Second World War.
Yeah, there will be wars and rumors of wars and people running around with their hair on fire. You know, that happens every age, almost every year of every decade.
Can these things, the climate, now, they cannot be rationally discussed rather than picking passages from some Hindu scripture or some biblical scripture or some other. Can we rationally discuss this and see whether...
Well, you know that the world is going to end this month. Do you know that?
Well, I missed out on that last
Well,
time.
no, well, it's the 21st, I understand. There's a group out there saying that we can know when the end of the world will be, and it will be May 21st, so set your calendar. I would recommend partying. Of course, I recommend partying anytime for any excuse. But set your calendar, or mark your calendar there for the 21st. And on the, you know, I've heard of a story recently where a person called this particular group who are putting this forward, saying, you know, taking donations, of course, and he promised to give. He said, "I'll send in $10,000," and the lady said, "Great, if you'll give me back $10,000 plus 10% extra after the event, after the day is gone." You know, you would think that they would take that bet if the world was really going to end.
That's called a test case.
She would not take that wager.
Yeah, I knew of a preacher who's predicting the end of the world in 10 years. He had a 30-year mortgage he kept paying on. So.
Yeah. There's also great concern about the pets left behind. If you have a pet, it's not going to heaven. You might want to talk to some atheist to take care of your pet, because we'll be around, and we love animals as much as anybody else.
I think it was Martin Luther thought pets would be in heaven. That man probably owned a dog.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, there's a great song out there called "Do Bees Go to Heaven?" If you get a chance, look it up on YouTube. It's really good.
Bees go to heaven.
Do bees go to heaven? The Rationalists of East Tennessee supports Camp Quest of the Smokies.
Okay.
It's fun science summer school adventure. Visit the website on your screen or email us for more information after the show. Both the Atheist Society and the Rationalist Society of East Tennessee help provide social outlets where if you don't believe in God, you're not alone.
Look into the Camp Quest for your child. I can testify. My granddaughter went to that last year, and she's going again this summer. And it's right here in the Smokies. And you don't have to go.
Lots of great activities and science-oriented things, and no religion. And they will help teach your child critical thinking. They won't teach your child what to think. They'll teach them how to think, how to question themselves and the world, and get the best information they can in response. We're getting pretty close to the end of the show. Still have 10 minutes left. 11. Call the number on your screen if you'd like to talk about any of the topics that we brought up today: moral relativism, emotion, hedonism, pleasure. Did you mark a few other notes that you'd like to bring up?
Let me deal with the notion of pleasure.
Okay.
Jeremy Bentham, a philosopher in the 19th century, and John Stuart Mill both dealt with hedonism. Mill also wrote the famous little book called Essay on Liberty, which is a classic. But anyhow, Bentham said, when we pursue pleasure, he meant by that sources of pleasure, we have to think, because some pleasures are destructive. And so you talk about the intensity of the pleasure, how long it lasts. It's not just a 15-minute thrill. The certainty of it, so it's not just pie in the sky.
Right.
Also, and yet other characteristics, one of which is whether or not it contributes to the pleasure of other people. And you could argue, and I think Mill was getting at in one of his fellow Englishmen, is many of our pleasures come with, and maybe most of them, with other people, which means then the principle of respect is already there, and lying is having a rule against lying is already there.
Right. Think about the pleasure you get from a musical concert. The people up on stage are just loving what they're doing, and they're getting pleasure from creating the music so many people enjoy, and everybody in the audience is enjoying it as well.
And to make that possible, and people did not steal the violins.
No.
And the musicians told the truth by being there on time.
Right.
I mean, you had all to make this pleasure possible. We have developed ethics in order to make pleasure possible.
And you think of all the churches nowadays that include music in their services and stuff, and their congregation get much pleasure out of it. But there are actually religions out there that eschew music. Don't want you to listen to it. You get too much pleasure from it. Pleasure is bad.
Yeah, the churches of Christ, musical instruments.
Right.
Yeah.
So we do have a call
in the churches
on the screen. So welcome to Freethought Forum. You're on the air. May we have a name or nickname?
Hello, this is Phil.
Hey, Phil.
I had a question concerning moral relativism. I think a lot of Christians, fundamental Christians at least, believe that killing is wrong under any circumstance. And I saw somebody on television on the Colbert Report, I think this week, or on Jon Stewart, The Daily Show, who was actually putting forth the Christian notion that no, they should not have killed Osama bin Laden. But I'll bet if you took a poll of Christians, most would say it was okay to kill Osama bin Laden in the way that he was killed. What are your comments on that?
Okay, Christians, like Jews and others, divide on that, and atheists divide on that. I have an atheist friend did not believe in capital punishment, and I have Christians.
Well, how do you feel yourself?
Yeah.
How do you feel about it?
I have no objections to capital punishment, except this. But that's a big, and my friend made me see the light on this. The problem with capital punishment is that we have a fallible court system, and we could execute the wrong person. And that gives me a lot of pause, a lot of pause.
Right. There's no chance for getting it right the second time with capital punishment.
And knowing how fallible I am.
I agree with you on it. Now, as far as going after Obama, I think that it was the right thing to do because he did take it on himself to kill quite a few Americans.
Yeah.
And even myself and a lot of Christians in the nation and a lot of atheists too believe in the concept of justice. And since we don't believe in an afterlife, we don't believe he's going to be receive his justice in the afterlife. So I think that it was probably the best thing to do. It will curtail any future activities in that vein that he had on 9/11.
Right.
And he leaves us very little choice, actually.
On the O'Reilly show, I noticed that only about 68% thought that Osama bin Laden was in hell now, and O'Reilly said, "Well, where do they think he is?" And my obvious answer is, "Well, in the ocean."
Yeah. Well, maybe
he is. But I think that's a good point. To me, I wasn't necessarily rejoicing in the way that some Americans were when he was killed. However, I felt that it was maybe necessary to kill somebody like that.
Right. I agree.
Not that you would rejoice over it, but just because of, like you say, he had been so destructive of life, and that I think it was just sometimes it's necessary to kill, and in a case that would be morally, I think, relativistic.
Would you say that maybe a fitting punishment for him would be to keep him alive and make him listen to O'Reilly for about 20 hours a day?
Yeah. That would be cruel and unusual punishment.
Maybe hell. Maybe he'd think that was hell.
Yeah, he may have already been doing that. Well, thanks very much. I'll hang up now. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. I'd like to read just a couple of paragraphs here from my website. I'd plug it, Digital Freethought. If you get a chance to look up Digital Freethought, you can find it on the web. I get a question often from the religious people saying, Christian morals are founded on the Bible. How can you say you're a moral person if you don't believe in the Bible? My answer is that, first of all, morals predate the Bible by thousands of years. They weren't invented with the Ten Commandments. It's always been against human values to be dishonest, to harm or kill your fellow man or steal his possessions. All societies, ancient and modern, have been founded on these principles. They had to be, else they would not have long endured.
They wouldn't have survived, right?
Also, even strong Catholics and Christians, the many various sects of Christianity in America per se, cannot agree among themselves on specific issues of morality like abortion or birth control, homosexuality, and women's rights. Not too long, the Bible was used to justify slavery. Before the Civil War, many preachers from the pulpit were teaching that slavery was justified by the Bible.
And racism, I can remember racism justified in the 40s and 50s.
Right. And it was used to deny women's rights. The Bible is still being used today to justify the killing of abortion doctors and other people who live in work in the women's health clinics. Bibles. Would you like to talk about Bibles addressing morals per se? I mean, because it's from what I just
I think
read.
You could say there is no such thing as the biblical ethic. I think that's a mistake because the Bible simply is not one voice.
No.
And there you could have one preacher claiming this, but then there's another preacher, and then all of them saying this is the Word of God, but every single one of them is a human being saying.
Right, and they say different things.
And furthermore, they not only say it's the infallible revelation of God, then they interpret it.
But even in the Old Testament, they really weren't about morals. In the Old Testament, it was all about obey. Obey the God, obey the big man in the sky. You've got to do what he says. Now, we didn't get into morals much until we get into the New Testament. But more of the New Testament was on believing.
Yeah, let me be fair from my perspective on this. The Christians have done an injustice to the Hebrew Bible. You've got the golden rule in the Hebrew Bible.
In the Old Testament?
Yeah. Now, you've got some brutality there, too, but then on the New Testament, it's got the book of Revelation.
Yeah, but the purpose wasn't to tell you to do right for right's sakes. It was to tell you to do right because God would punish you if you didn't.
Well, there are other passages. See, what I'm saying is you just can't say the Bible says because it's not one voice.
Right.
There's simply passages like treat your neighbor as one of yours, treat strangers as one of yours because you were once a stranger. It's not because God says so, because they're saying,
which passage would that be?
I'd have to,
what book?
I'd have to look
Jewish
it up
Bible?
again. Yeah, it's the Hebrew Bible.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the passages say, in effect, it's the golden rule. You were a stranger in Egypt, and you knew what it's like. Now, turn it the other way around, and don't do the injustice. Now, that's pretty high morality. A lot of us, when we...
But weren't they talking about their own people, though?
Well, no, they were saying... No, I'm talking about the strangers.
The strangers.
They were saying the strangers...
Well, there are a lot of, like, Americans that are strangers to me. You know, he could be talking about Jews who are strangers to them.
No, the passage clearly is outsiders outside their clan.
Okay.
And treat them as if they are in your clan.
Okay, well, it's good to know. We have a minute left. I'm going to start closing off, start wrapping up. Get out your pen and paper. If you'd like to send us feedback, please send us an email at freethoughtforum@yahoo.com. You can call this station and purchase a DVD of this and past shows at 215-8848. This has been Freethought Forum, and my name is Larry Rhodes, and that's Joe Barnhart. Thanks to Sam. Thanks to Sam and technical staff of the CTV and all our callers. Garrison Keeler said, "Be well, do good work, and keep in touch." Did you have a last thing that you'd like to say before the cameras go dim?
No, just stay in touch, and you teach us to be kind in responding to your comments.
And there's nothing wrong with pleasure. Hedonism is good in measure, but
yeah.